HOA dumped poison in our lake, but now their water is at risk. I still remember the first time I saw it. A giant tanker truck backed up to the shore of our quiet neighborhood lake, pouring black liquid straight into the water where kids once played, where families once fished. And then the sign appeared. Contaminated lake, no fishing. At first, I thought it was just another cruel HOA rule. But then, I discovered a dark secret. The very water they were poisoning was the same water they were drinking. And what happened next, no one in the neighborhood could have imagined. Welcome, friends, to HOA Max Stories, where I share the unbelievable dramas of homeowners associations across America. My name's John. I've lived in a small HOA-controlled community for over 20 years, and let me tell you, I've seen everything. I'm just a regular neighbor, but I've made it my mission to tell these stories so people like you know the truth. Before we begin, do me a favor, if you're over 50 like me, hit that subscribe button the same way you'd wave to an old neighbor passing by. It means the world to me, and I'd love to know, from where are you watching today? Drop your city or state in the comments. I'll be reading them all. I was standing near the edge of the lake that day. The air smelled strange, not fresh like water usually does, but heavy, almost like chemicals. I watched that tanker truck slowly reverse, the tires pressing into the grass, leaving deep marks, and then, right in front of my eyes, a giant black pipe came down from the back. At first, I thought, maybe they're filling the lake with fresh water, maybe something good is finally happening here. But then, I saw it. Thick, dark liquid came rushing out, splashing into the water, spreading fast like ink in a glass of clear water. I froze. This was my neighborhood, my home, and the lake wasn't just water to us. Families walked around it every evening. Kids threw stones into it. Some of us even sat there alone to think when life got heavy. But now, it was changing before my eyes. I remember holding my fishing pole that day. I had just pulled out a fish. It should have been shining silver, healthy, alive. But instead, it looked weak, almost sick. Its body twitched in my hand. Its gills moved slowly, struggling for air. And in that moment, I knew something was deeply wrong. I looked around. There was a new sign stuck in the ground. Bright white, bold black letters. Contaminated lake, no fishing. HOA regulated. I felt my stomach sink. The HOA had been strict before, telling us what color curtains we could hang, how short our grass had to be, even what kind of flowers we could plant in our own front yard. But this was different. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about poison. I walked closer to the tape they had put around the lake. The yellow strip blew lightly in the wind, almost like it was mocking me. That's when I saw her, the HOA president. Dressed sharp, standing tall, arms crossed like a queen guarding her castle. She didn't even flinch while the black liquid kept pouring. I shouted at her. "Why are you doing this? This is our lake." She gave me the kind of look people give when they believe they are more powerful than you. Cold. Hard. No feelings. "This is HOA business," she said. "Stay out of it." And that was it. She turned her face away, as if my voice, my anger, didn't even exist. I stood there with the fish in my hand, pointing at her, wanting to scream more, but something stopped me. It wasn't fear, it was the realization that no one else was speaking up. Around me, neighbors stood quietly, just watching. Some shook their heads. Others just walked away. I wanted to ask them, "Don't you see what's happening? Don't you care?" But their silence told me everything. This wasn't the first time the HOA had done something like this. They ruled through silence. People had learned that fighting back meant trouble. Fines. Letters. Maybe even threats. So they stayed quiet. But I couldn't. Not this time. I went back home that night and couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that sick fish in my hand, those black waves spreading across the lake, the sign that told us we were forbidden to even touch the water anymore. And then, I remembered something. A few years ago, during one of the HOA meetings, they mentioned water supply. Something about the community tanks, something about the lake being connected. At that time, nobody paid much attention. Most of us were just bored, waiting for the meeting to end so we could go home. But now, the pieces were clicking in my head. What if the lake wasn't just a lake? What if the water running into our homes, the water we drank, cooked with, and bathed in, was connected to this poison lake? The thought made me sit straight up in bed. Could it really be true? The next evening, I decided to follow that tanker truck. It came back again, like clockwork. The driver didn't even look around, as if this was normal business. I stayed far behind, careful not to get noticed. The truck rumbled through the neighborhood until it reached the back area, where most people never go. And that's when I saw it. Pipes. Thick, metal pipes running from the lake, underground, toward the water tanks. My heart pounded. It was true. The HOA wasn't just poisoning the lake, they were poisoning themselves. Their own homes. Their own families. Their own children. I stood there in the shadows, staring at those pipes, trying to catch my breath. Why would they do this? What kind of leaders destroy the very place they live in? And that's when a chill went down my spine. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. The HOA wanted to keep people away from the lake, no matter the cost. Even if it meant poisoning the water we all depended on. I knew I had to speak up. But how? If I confronted them, would anyone believe me? If I stayed silent, would my family be safe? I held onto the fish I had caught earlier that day. Its body had already gone stiff, its eyes dull. This wasn't just a fish anymore. It was proof. The next HOA meeting was coming up in a week. I decided I would wait until then. I would stand up, in front of everyone, and reveal the truth. But until that day, the poison kept flowing. Every night, the truck returned. Every night, more liquid poured into the water. Every night, the black spread wider. And with each night, I felt the fear growing in me. Would I be strong enough to face them? Would my neighbors finally listen? Or would I be standing alone against the most powerful group in our community? And here's the part one want to ask you, my friends. If you were in my shoes, and you discovered your own HOA was poisoning the very water supply your family drinks from, would you stay quiet, or would you risk everything to expose them? Tell me in the comments. I really want to hear what you would do. The night before the HOA meeting, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the air conditioning. But in my head, all I could hear was the sound of that truck, the gushing of poison pouring into the lake. My wife asked me why I was tossing and turning. "Something on your mind?" she whispered. I didn't want to scare her, so I just said, "It's nothing, go back to sleep." But it wasn't nothing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pipe, that black liquid, and those hidden underground lines feeding into the water tanks. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just a fight about fishing anymore. This was about life itself. The next morning, I walked down to the lake again. The smell was worse. Stronger. It burned my nose. I bent down to look closer at the water, and I swear, the surface had a strange oily shine. And then, I saw a duck. It was floating, lifeless, near the shore. Its wings spread wide, as if frozen mid-flight. I'd seen kids feed those ducks every weekend. Families loved them. And now one of them was dead, poisoned just like the fish. I picked it up with a stick, held it in the air, and neighbors walking by stopped to look. Some gasped. Some whispered. But no one spoke out loud. That silence again. It made me furious. I raised my voice so everyone could hear. This is what the HOA has done. This is your lake too. Some shook their heads. One man muttered, "Leave it, you can't win." And then he walked away. That was the problem. Nobody believed they could stand up to the HOA. But I wasn't going to give up. Not this time. As the week passed, I collected everything I could. Dead fish. Photos of the black liquid. Even recordings of the truck pouring it in at night. I wanted proof so strong that the HOA couldn't deny it. But the closer the meeting got, the heavier the air in my house felt. My wife kept warning me. John, don't go too far. They have lawyers. They have money. What do you have? I looked at her and said softly, I have the truth. She sighed, shook her head, and walked away. I knew she was scared for me. But deep down, I also knew she was scared for herself. For our family. Finally, the day came. The HOA meeting was being held in the community hall, the same place we had birthday parties and holiday gatherings. Only this time, it didn't feel festive. It felt like walking into a courtroom. The room was full. Neighbors sat in rows of chairs, whispering, waiting. The HOA board sat at a long table up front, papers stacked neatly, glasses of water beside them. The president sat in the middle, calm as ever, eyes scanning the room like a hawk. When the meeting started, they talked about budgets, landscaping, pool hours, the usual nonsense. But my hands were shaking, waiting for my moment. Finally, during the open floor section, I stood up. The room went quiet. I held up my phone and pressed play. The video of the tanker truck filled the small screen. Black poison rushing into the lake. Gasps filled the room. I held up the dead fish in a sealed bag. This, I said, my voice trembling but strong, is what happens when you poison our lake. The president's face didn't move. But I saw her hands grip the table tighter. I pointed at her. And don't tell me it's for safety, because I know the truth. The lake is connected to the water we drink. You are poisoning all of us. The room exploded. People shouted. Some stood up. Others covered their mouths in shock. For the first time, the silence was broken. The HOA president slammed her hand on the table. Enough, she barked. But the damage was done. Neighbors started turning to each other. Is it true? Our water? Is he right? I pressed forward. Go home tonight. Smell your tap water. Taste it. You'll see what I'm saying. The president looked pale now. She tried to keep control, but the crowd wasn't listening anymore. Someone shouted, my kid was sick last week. Another yelled, our water smelled bad too. It was chaos. And in the middle of it all, I stood firm, holding the fish, holding the proof, watching the mighty HOA crack for the first time. That night, I went home and collapsed into a chair. I felt drained, but also alive. For once, I hadn't been ignored. The next morning, everything changed. Reports spread fast. Families began testing their water. Some found strange colors, odd smells. Local chatter grew louder. Rumors spread like wildfire. And the HOA? They tried to shut it down. Letters were sent. Threats made. Defamation, they called it. But the truth, once out, is hard to bury. I knew this was only the beginning. Because when poison is in the water, you can't hide it forever. And now, I want to ask you. If you had proof that your HOA was poisoning not just the lake, but the water your entire neighborhood drinks, would you take it public like I did, risking fines and threats, or would you stay quiet to protect yourself? Drop your answer in the comments, because I want to know how many of you would fight back, and how many would stay silent. The days after that meeting felt like walking through a storm. I couldn't go outside without neighbors stopping me. Some whispered thanks. Others glared at me as if I had opened a door they wanted to keep shut. But one thing was clear, nothing was the same anymore. That night, I turned on my kitchen faucet. I held a glass underneath. And when I raised it to my nose, I smelled it. A strange, sharp odor. Almost metallic, almost chemical. I looked at my wife and said, "Taste this." She shook her head. "I don't have to. I can smell it from here." And she was right. The water that once ran clean and fresh now carried the stink of poison. The neighborhood started buzzing. Mrs. Henderson, who lived 2 doors down, came running to me one morning. "My grandson threw up last night after drinking water," she said, panicked. "Do you think it's the lake?" I looked her in the eye and didn't know how to answer. But deep inside, I already knew the truth. The HOA had done this. And it was spreading. Soon, I saw people carrying bottled water from their cars, loading packs of it into their homes. Some even filled bathtubs, scared the taps might run dry. The HOA sent out letters, of course. "The water is safe," they said. "Do not panic." But nobody believed them anymore. The trust was gone. One evening, I walked back down to the lake. The setting sun painted the water red, but not in a beautiful way. It looked like blood mixing with black. And that's when I noticed another truck. But this one wasn't pouring poison. It was parked quietly, lights off, engine running. I crouched behind a tree, watching. A man stepped out, wearing gloves, carrying something like a test kit. He walked to the edge, dipped bottles into the water, sealed them, and put them in a cooler. I knew right then, someone bigger was getting involved. Maybe the county. Maybe the state. I didn't approach him. I just stayed hidden, watching, my heart pounding. Because if the government was testing the lake, it meant the HOA secret was already leaking beyond our neighborhood. The next morning, everything exploded. Phones rang. Messages spread. People posted online. "The water's contaminated," someone wrote on Facebook. Another said, "Tests confirmed poison levels." The HOA tried to silence it, but it was too late. I heard angry voices outside my window. Neighbors gathered in small groups, waving the letters the HOA had sent, shouting about lies, shouting about their sick children, shouting about betrayal. For years, these people had bowed their heads, afraid to speak. But now, they were awake. And it scared the HOA. I was called to a private meeting with the board. They sat in a circle, faces tight, voices low. The president looked at me like I was the enemy of the entire community. "You need to stop," she said sharply. "Your stories are creating panic." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "It's not my stories creating panic. It's your poison." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you're a hero? You're just a troublemaker. And troublemakers pay." Her words were cold, like ice sliding down my spine. But I didn't flinch. "Pay?" I said. "You're already paying. And soon, everyone will know the truth." She stood up, slammed her folder shut, and walked out. The rest of the board followed, not one of them meeting my eyes. I sat there alone, my hands trembling. For the first time, I wondered if I had pushed too far. That night, I heard a knock at my door. Slow. Heavy. When I opened it, nobody was there. Just an envelope lying on the porch. I bent down, picked it up, and opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence typed across it. "Stop, or you'll regret it." No name. No signature. I stood frozen, the words burning in my hands. This wasn't just about water anymore. This was about power. About intimidation. The HOA wanted me silent. But instead of fear, I felt fire. Because if they were threatening me, it meant they were desperate. And desperation always means weakness. The next day, I walked to the lake again. More ducks floated lifeless. The grass around the edges had turned yellow. Even the air smelled different, heavier, like breathing poison itself. I sat on the bench, staring at the reflection of the sky in the black water, and I realized something important. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's. And maybe, just maybe, if I could get the entire neighborhood to stand together, we could break the HOA's control once and for all. But here's where I need to pause and ask you something. If your HOA tried to silence you with threats, if they left warnings at your door just to scare you into silence, would you back down, or would you push forward, knowing the risks? Tell me honestly in the comments, because sometimes, standing up means standing alone. The morning after that envelope showed up on my porch, I felt different. I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore. Every creak of the floor, every shadow outside the window, made me wonder if someone was watching. But fear wasn't going to stop me. Not anymore. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at that note again. Stop, or you'll regret it. The words were supposed to silence me. But instead, they lit something inside me. Because if they wanted me quiet so badly, then I must be closer to the truth than I ever realized. That afternoon, I walked through the neighborhood. People looked at me differently now. Some nodded, giving me small smiles of encouragement. Others avoided eye contact, as if being seen near me might bring them trouble too. One man, Mr. Parker, an old veteran with a limp, stopped me at the mailbox. He leaned close and whispered, "You're right. I smelled it too. But be careful, they don't play fair." His warning stuck in my head all day. Later that evening, I saw the tanker again. It rolled up to the lake like it owned the place. The driver stepped out, glancing around casually, then unrolled the pipe. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and captured every second. This time, though, something was different. The driver looked nervous. He kept checking over his shoulder. His hands shook as he worked the valve. And when the liquid poured out, I realized why. It wasn't just dark water anymore. It was thick, almost sludge-like, bubbling as it spread across the surface. The smell hit me from across the shore. It burned my throat, made my eyes water. This wasn't just poison. This was death itself. I backed away, my heart pounding, clutching my phone like it was the only weapon I had. The next morning, the news broke. Local reporters showed up at the lake. Cameras rolled as they filmed the yellow grass, the dead ducks, the oily water. Neighbors crowded behind them, shouting over each other. "This is our drinking water. My kids are sick." They knew about this. And there I was, standing in the middle of it all, holding up my phone with the video I had recorded the night before. The reporter turned to me. "Sir, are you saying the HOA is behind this?" I looked straight into the camera and said, "Yes. And I can prove it." That night, everything exploded online. The video spread across social media. People commented, shared, argued. Some supported me. Others accused me of lying. But one thing was certain, the story was out. And the HOA could no longer bury it. The very next day, the president of the HOA came to my house. She didn't knock politely. She banged on my door until it shook. When I opened it, she stormed in without asking. Her face was red, her eyes sharp like knives. "You don't know what you're doing," she hissed. "You think you're saving the neighborhood? You're destroying it. Property values will drop. Our reputation will be ruined. This community will collapse because of you." I stood tall, my voice calm. "No, it's collapsing because of you. You poisoned the water, not me." She glared at me, lips tight. For a moment, I thought she might actually strike me. But then she stepped back, pointed a finger in my face, and said one word. "Regret." And then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. That night, I couldn't shake her words. Regret. What did she mean? What were they planning now? I checked the locks on every door. Closed the blinds. Sat in the dark, listening to every sound outside. I was no longer just fighting rules and letters. I was fighting power. Power that had money, lawyers, and no fear of crossing lines. But as scared as I was, something else kept me strong. The neighborhood was finally waking up. People were talking. People were questioning. And for the first time, they weren't whispering, they were shouting. 2 days later, a protest formed by the lake. Dozens of neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, holding signs they made from cardboard and markers. Stop the poison. Save our water. HOA lies. I stood with them, holding the dead fish in one hand, the video playing on my phone in the other. Reporters were back. Cameras flashed. Drones buzzed overhead. And the HOA board? They hid. Not one of them came out of their homes. The queen who once stood so proud by the lake was nowhere to be seen. But I knew it wasn't over. They wouldn't go down quietly. People like that, they never admit defeat. And as I stood there, leading my neighbors in chants, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what was coming. Because the more the truth spread, the more dangerous I became to them. And when people with power feel cornered, they strike back. That night, as I finally lay down to rest, I asked myself one thing. How far were they willing to go to silence me? And here's what I want to ask you, my friends. If your HOA, your own neighbors, started treating you like the enemy just for speaking the truth, would you keep fighting on the front lines, or would you step back, let others carry the battle, and protect your own family instead? Let me know in the comments, because I need to know how many of you would stand, and how many would step away. The protest by the lake had shaken the entire neighborhood, but what happened the very next night shook me to the core. It was around midnight when I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind, branches tapping against the window. But then, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, right on my porch. I froze. My wife stirred in bed, whispering, "What is it?" I didn't answer. I grabbed a flashlight, crept down the hall, and peeked through the curtains. There they were. 2 men. Dressed in dark clothes, standing on my porch, whispering to each other. One of them held something in his hand, a crowbar. My heart pounded so hard I thought they would hear it through the glass. I flicked on the porch light. And just like that, they bolted. Running off into the night, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there, frozen, the light buzzing above me, the empty porch staring back. That was it. The warning was over. Now, they were making moves. The next morning, I walked out to get the paper and found something spray-painted on my mailbox. Big, red letters. Snitch. Neighbors saw it. Some gasped. Some shook their heads. But no one touched it. No one helped clean it. I stood there with a rag in my hand, scrubbing the word off, my arms shaking with anger. Because that wasn't just paint. That was a message. The HOA was telling me, everyone now knew I was the enemy. But here's the thing about fear. It can crush you. Or, it can fuel you. For me, it lit a fire. That night, I decided I wasn't going to hide anymore. I set up a small meeting in my garage. I knocked on doors, whispered to people I trusted, and told them to come. 10 neighbors showed up. Not many, but enough. We sat in folding chairs, the smell of oil and old wood filling the air. I looked at their faces, tired, scared, but ready to listen. I can't do this alone, I said. They'll bury me if I keep standing by myself. But if we stand together, they can't silence us all. Mrs. Henderson raised her hand. What if they fine us? What if they take our homes? I looked her straight in the eye. What good is a home if the water inside it is poison? The garage went quiet. But in that silence, I saw something change. Courage. It wasn't loud. It wasn't bold. But it was there. Over the next few days, more people joined us. We called ourselves the Neighbor's Voice. We made flyers, we shared water tests, we talked to reporters. And slowly, the tide turned. Families who once stayed silent now stood at their windows, waving to us as we passed. People began donating bottled water to others who couldn't afford it. Kids drew pictures of clean lakes and ducks, taping them to their doors. The neighborhood was alive again, but not because of the HOA. Because of us. Of course, the HOA fought back harder. Letters started arriving daily. Fines for noise violations. Threats of lawsuits. Even rumors that some people might lose their homes if they didn't back down. But for every letter they sent, another neighbor joined our side. It was no longer just me versus them. It was us versus them. And that terrified the board. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the lake glowed red, we gathered at the shore. Dozens of us this time. Some with candles. Some with signs. All of us standing in silence, staring at the poisoned water. It wasn't a protest. It was a vigil. For what we had lost. And for what we were fighting to save. I looked around and realized something powerful. For years, the HOA had controlled us with silence. But now, the silence belonged to us. A silence of unity. A silence louder than their threats. The next day, I got a phone call. A voice on the other end said, "We're investigating the contamination. We need your testimony." It was the county. Maybe even higher. The fight had finally left the borders of our neighborhood. And that's when I knew the HOA's time was running out. But I also knew desperate people can be dangerous. And when power slips away, they will do anything to hold on. That night, lying in bed, I thought about everything we had been through. The dead fish. The poisoned water. The threats. The mailbox. The midnight visitors. And I asked myself, was it worth it? Then I remembered the faces of my neighbors in the garage. The kids drawing pictures. The candles by the lake. Yes. It was worth it. Because this wasn't just a fight about water anymore. It was a fight about freedom. And now, my friends, I want to ask you. If your neighborhood stood divided, some siding with the HOA out of fear, others finally rising against them, would you take the risk of leading the fight, or would you wait in the shadows, hoping someone else would carry the burden for you? Tell me in the comments, because I need to know how many of you would take the first step into the fire. The call from the county had changed everything. For the first time, it wasn't just me and a handful of neighbors fighting against the HOA. Now, the government itself was watching. But that also meant the pressure was heavier than ever. The very next day, inspectors showed up at the lake. They wore white suits, gloves, masks, the kind of outfits that make ordinary people panic. They dipped bottles into the water, scraped mud into bags, took notes on clipboards. Neighbors gathered behind the caution tape, whispering, pointing, snapping pictures. And the HOA board? They stayed hidden. Not one of them came to face the crowd. That night, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from neighbors poured in. Do you think they'll shut down the board? What if they sue us? Will they finally admit the truth? I didn't know the answers. But I knew one thing, whatever was about to happen would change this neighborhood forever. 2 days later, the results came in. Contamination confirmed. Dangerous chemical levels far above safety limits. The water was declared unsafe for drinking, bathing, even touching. The county issued an official notice. Every home was warned. Bottled water would be delivered until further notice. The neighborhood erupted in outrage. For years, the HOA had silenced us with threats. Now, they couldn't silence a government report. That evening, I walked outside and saw something I'll never forget. Dozens of neighbors standing in the street, waving copies of the report in the air, shouting for the board to come out. Come face us. You poisoned us. Get out of our neighborhood. It was chaos, but it was righteous chaos. And in the middle of it all, I saw her. The president. She stood at the top of the clubhouse steps, flanked by 2 board members. Her face pale, her hands clutching the railing so tightly her knuckles were white. When she tried to speak, the crowd roared louder. She raised her hand, demanding silence. And against all odds, the voices slowly dimmed. Then she said the words that shocked us all. There has been a mistake. A mistake? The crowd erupted again, but she pushed forward. We did not poison the lake. We were protecting it. We were following guidelines. The contamination came from outside sources. Industrial runoff. Not us. Her lies tasted bitter in the air. I stepped forward, holding up my phone again, the video playing for all to see. Was this industrial runoff, too? Your truck, your pipe, your poison? The crowd gasped. She froze. And for the first time since this war began, she had no words. The days that followed were tense. The HOA scrambled. Lawyers came in. Letters were sent out claiming innocence. But no one cared anymore. The truth had been seen, smelled, tasted in every glass of water. The neighbors who once bowed their heads now stood tall. Meetings were called not by the board, but by us. We gathered in garages, living rooms, backyards. We talked openly, freely. We made plans. And then, the unthinkable happened. A petition spread. A petition to dissolve the board. At first, I thought it was just talk. Something people say when they're angry. But within days, signatures poured in. One after another. Page after page. People who had never dared speak against the HOA were now signing their names in bold ink. It was unstoppable. The board fought back, of course. Threatened lawsuits, fines, even foreclosure. But the neighborhood had passed the point of fear. They had tasted truth. And once you taste it, you can't go back. One evening, I sat on my porch watching kids ride bikes down the street. Bottled water cases stacked on porches. Signs reading "End the HOA" taped to windows. For the first time in years, I felt hope. But that hope came with danger. Because power doesn't die quietly. And as the board realized they were losing their grip, I knew they would lash out one last time. And I was right. Late one night, I heard the roar of engines outside. I opened the blinds and saw 3 cars parked at the clubhouse. Lights on. Shadows moving inside. It wasn't a regular meeting. It was a war council. I slipped on my jacket, grabbed my phone, and crept closer through the darkness. Through the window, I saw them. The president and the board, huddled around a table, voices sharp, fists slamming. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Control the narrative. Blame the county. Shut him down. And then, her voice cut through clear. He's the reason this is happening. If we silence him, this all dies down. My blood turned cold. They weren't just angry. They were plotting against me. I backed away slowly, heart racing, phone trembling in my hand. I knew what I had to do. If they wanted me gone, then I had to be louder than ever. I had to make sure the truth could no longer be buried, no matter what happened to me. The next morning, I sent every video, every photo, every piece of proof I had to the reporters. I told them everything. And once it was out there, it couldn't be taken back. The story spread beyond our town. Other communities began to ask questions. Other HOAs faced scrutiny. It was bigger than just us now. It was a movement. But that night, as I sat in the dark with my family, waiting, listening, wondering what the board might do next, I couldn't help but think of one thing. What price would I pay for telling the truth? And now I want to ask you, my friends. If you were in my place, knowing your words could change everything but also make you the biggest target, would you still stand up and shout, or would you step back, hoping someone else would carry the fight for you? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is where courage is truly tested. The night after I leaked every piece of proof to the reporters, I barely slept. I sat by the window with the lights off, staring into the darkness, waiting for headlights, waiting for footsteps, waiting for something. But the night passed quietly. Too quietly. It was the silence before the storm, and I could feel it. The next morning, the neighborhood erupted. The news was everywhere: local TV, newspapers, online blogs. HOA caught poisoning lake water. Families exposed to toxic supply. Community board under fire. Neighbors who once looked down when they passed me now walked up, shook my hand, patted my back. Thank you for speaking out. You saved us. You did what none of us could. But their gratitude didn't ease my fear. Because I knew the board wouldn't let this go. By evening, the HOA called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. The air was electric, thick with anger and curiosity. Everyone showed up, young, old, families with kids, retirees with folded arms. Reporters even stood at the back, cameras ready. And there they were. The board. Sitting stiff, their faces pale, papers spread in front of them. The president tried to speak, her voice shaky but still carrying that old tone of authority. We are victims of lies. This man, she pointed at me, has spread false information. He has destroyed our reputation. He has turned this community against itself. The crowd erupted, boos, shouts, voices clashing. I stood up, holding the microphone in my hand, and the noise died down. You poisoned us, I said calmly. You poisoned our children. You poisoned yourselves. And I have proof. Gasps rippled through the room as I raised my phone, projecting the videos on the screen behind me, the tanker, the pipes, the sludge pouring into the lake. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide, jaws tight. This isn't a lie, I continued. This is what they did to us. And now, every single one of you knows the truth. The president slammed her hand on the table. Those videos are taken out of context, she snapped. We were following protocol. But her words fell flat. A voice shouted from the back, my daughter's been sick for weeks. Another yelled, my water stinks like chemicals. A third cried out, how many more lies are you going to tell us? The room turned into chaos. People stood, waving the county report in the air, shouting for the board to step down. The board members looked terrified. Their fortress of power was crumbling brick by brick, right in front of everyone. And then, something happened I'll never forget. Mr. Parker, the old veteran who once warned me to be careful, slowly rose from his chair. His cane tapped against the floor as he walked to the front. He stood beside me, his voice shaky but strong. We fought wars overseas for freedom, and here we are, poisoned in our own homes by the people we trusted. Enough is enough. The crowd erupted into cheers, stomping, clapping, chanting. Step down. Step down. Step down. The walls shook with the sound. The board sat frozen, eyes darting, trapped. And in that moment, they knew it was over. Within a week, the petition reached its goal. The HOA board was dissolved. Investigations opened. Lawsuits filed. The president who once stood so tall now avoided the neighborhood entirely. Her house went up for sale within days. Rumors spread that she might even face charges. The tanker trucks never came back. The lake, though scarred, slowly began to heal. Ducks returned. The oily film faded. Children laughed on the shore again. And bottled water no longer piled on porches, clean water flowed from our taps once more. I still remember the first night after it was all over. I sat by the lake, the moon reflecting on calm, quiet water. The air smelled fresh again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. But I also felt something else. A lesson carved deep into my bones. Power built on lies always collapses. And when enough voices rise together, even the strongest chains can break. Neighbors still thank me. Some call me a hero. But I don't see myself that way. I wasn't braver than anyone else. I was just the first one to say enough. And sometimes, that's all it takes. One voice. One spark. To light a fire big enough to burn down the walls of fear. And now, my friends, I'll leave you with this question. If your HOA, or any authority, pushed too far poisoning your peace, your freedom, even your water, would you be the one to stand up first, risking everything? Or would you wait for someone else to start the fight? Tell me in the comments, because your answer might just reveal how strong your voice really is.